Scientific revolutions? In the news, we often hear stories like this. Scientists discover that bees are conscious, or it has been declared that fish can consciously feel pain. In the light of our discussion about blindsight in monkeys and fear in mice, you should by now be able to tell that these news stories are rather unrealistic. It's never that simple. First of all, it depends on which theory of consciousness is correct, which is itself a complicated and unresolved business. And then the experimental details from the animals will need to be carefully considered. Unfortunately, as we mentioned in Class A, since the 1990s, there has been this culture of thinking of consciousness as a problem of theorizing in the abstract, sometimes at the expense of attention to empirical details in psychology and neuroscience. Sometimes people feel that there is an urgent need for a new scientific revolution, a rewriting of the fundamental laws of physics in order to accommodate something as magical as consciousness. If we look at the long history of science, revolutions do occasionally occur, but it's usually when the mounting evidence has presented itself very clearly to the point that the scientific community collectively comes to a consensus that there is no option but to move on to a new paradigm. But as you can probably appreciate by now, the evidence involved here is often very far from clear. Many important experiments are yet to be done. Accordingly, building a consensus within the community will require a lot more debates in the future. For those of you who are interested, I highly recommend Thomas Kuhn's classic book on the subject, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Ironically, sometimes those calling for radical solutions are not very familiar with the current debates. The next time you see someone making high-profile claims about groundbreaking new theories on consciousness, you should question them on the details. What are the alternative views, and what are the problems with those views exactly? How does this grand new theory better answer the 4 central empirical questions? Ask, because sometimes you'll be surprised. The point is, we don't call for a revolution without ample preparation. As Francis Crick once wrote, "We are not receptive to physicists trying to apply exotic physics to the brain about which they seem to know very little, and even less about consciousness." This might sound a little bit harsh, but it applies not only to theoretical physicists. Unfortunately, many others are prone to proclaiming high-sounding ideas without thinking through the facts first, or choosing to ignore those that do not fall in line with their own viewpoint. Remember that Crick has a theoretical physics training too.